I'd like to thank the government and people of Australia for hosting this gathering of global leaders at this critical moment in international affairs. With the hosting of the G20 summit and at the same time, presiding over the United Nations Security Council, Australia is in pivotal global leadership role at a time when the world faces a serious security, development, and environmental challenges. Pressures on people and the planet are building.
We take a closer look now at the world's surging refugee problem, which the United Nations point person on the issue calls a mega crisis.
For nearly a decade, Antonio Guterres has overseen the UN High Commission for Refugees' far-flung operations around the world. Recently, his agency issued a staggering new report. There are now more than 51 million people worldwide who are refugees or displaced in their own lands, more than any time since World War II.
Little Mohammed is suffering. He's weak and thin. Like thousands of children in Syria, he's malnourished.
We've been days without food. We only eat apricots as it is the only thing available.
This is happening in a suburb of Damascus, eastern Ghouta.
Right now, an estimated 35.8 million men, women, and children are trapped in modern-day slavery. That's according to the just-released Global Slavery Index for 2014. It's published by the Walk Free Foundation. The organization says Mauritania has the highest percentage of its population enslaved. But in terms of absolute numbers, India tops the list with nearly 14.3 million people enslaved.
Last weekend, on the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, former Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev warned that a new Cold War could soon be underway, if it isn't already. And in just a few days since, Russia reportedly sent more troops into Ukraine and then sent 4 warships to waters off Australia, where Vladimir Putin and other world leaders are meeting.
Take a look at these black dots that we're showing here. This report says 40 encounters between the Russians and other nations over the past 8 months have rattled nerves and raised tensions to a Cold War level. You mentioned that close call that Jim mentioned as well between a passenger jet and a Russian jet along in here. But there are many others from the Russians. This report says they staged a simulated bombing attack on a Danish island. A Russian jet made threatening maneuvers toward a U.S. reconnaissance plane, including showing that it was fully armed with missiles. Russian planes have buzzed ships. And they even, out in this area, practiced a cruise missile strike within range of New York, Washington, and Chicago. Jake?
It's 10 a.m. on an autumn morning in Transylvania. More than 1,000 Romanian soldiers are engaged in war games. They're under the guidance of hundreds of U.S. Marines.
The smaller Miklish, we call it an APOB.
It's a routine NATO exercise in military readiness.
1 minute!
But demonstrations of force like this have taken on a new urgency for the West. Here, beside the Carpathian Mountains in Romania, these soldiers are training for battle. Just a 7-hour drive from Ukraine, where Russian-backed separatists set off the worst confrontation between Moscow and the West since the end of the Cold War.
I have some pretty heartbreaking, devastating news to report. I'm so sad to have to report this, but we are just getting the word confirmed that Peter Kasig, also known as Abdul Rahman, his Muslim name, the 26-year-old aid worker who had gone to Syria to volunteer, has now been beheaded by ISIS. This news just coming to us just moments ago.
Well, airstrikes alone will not be enough to defeat ISIS. Ground troops are needed. That is the message, not coming from a U.S. military advisor, mind you. This is coming from the head of ISIS. This chilling message in the very same week. Questions arose about his fate after airstrikes hit a convoy of ISIS leaders near Mosul in northern Iraq. So in this audio recording, he taunts the U.S.-led coalition, calling them, quote, terrified, weak, and powerless. And he calls upon ISIS militants everywhere to, quote unquote, light the earth with fire upon all tyrants.
Hello and welcome to Middle East Matters here on France 24. I'm Tom Burgess-Watson. Coming up in the programme, a surge in violence. The Israeli authorities tighten security nationwide after a spate of deadly attacks carried out by Palestinians.
Already on edge, West Jerusalem is the scene of another attack. This time at a synagogue in Har Nof, an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood. According to Israeli police, 2 people wielding guns and axes entered the synagogue and attacked worshippers during morning prayers.
This morning, today, in Jerusalem, Palestinians attacked Jews who were praying in a synagogue. People who had come to worship God in the sanctuary of the synagogue were hatcheted and hacked and murdered in that holy place in an act of pure terror and senseless brutality and murder. I call on the Palestinian leadership at every single level to condemn this in the most powerful terms. This violence has no place anywhere. And to have this kind of act, which is a pure result of incitement, of calls for days of rage, of just an irresponsibility, is unacceptable.
After consultations among Council members, I have been authorised to make the following statement on their behalf. I quote, "The Security Council reiterates its grave concern about the unprecedented extent of the Ebola outbreak in Africa, which constitutes a threat to international peace and security, and the impact of the Ebola virus on West Africa."
But first, the official death toll from West Africa's Ebola epidemic has now climbed to almost 5,700. That's out of at least 15,935 cases across 8 countries. Guinea, Sierra Leone and Liberia have been hardest hit by the deadly outbreak. The World Health Organization's logged 600 new incidents of Ebola from the affected trio over the past week alone. Whilst the viral spread appears to be slowing in Liberia, infection rates in Sierra Leone are accelerating. The UN's emergency Ebola mission in the country's warned that a December containment target will not be met. And on Wednesday, Freetown asked the United States to send military aid to help ramp up the fight back there against Ebola.
Cold gripped much of the U.S. this week, but it turns out only last month, the world experienced its hottest October ever. The average temperature topped 58 degrees, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says it's the 5th month this year to set a new high. At this rate, 2014 is likely to be the warmest year since record-keeping began.
Security has been tight. Local media reporting that 7,000 police officers were on duty for this visit. This part of the Pope's visit was rich in symbolism. Francis's every word and gesture closely scrutinised as the pontiff tries to build bridges between Islam and Christianity.